There's even a connotation of networking as being something a little slimy, um, which is nonsense. It's not. What I think it is, it's having a purposeful conversation that can be for the benefit of both parties.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Veteran CEO Magazine, where veterans lead the way. I'm Jay Hernandez, and today my guest is Mike Nachshen. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Jay. It's a real pleasure, and I'm glad to be able to be of service to you and your listeners and viewers.
I appreciate that. Well, so our listeners know your background. Mike, you are the president and owner of Fortis Strategic Communications, LLC. You are also an Air Force veteran with multiple overseas deployments, including Afghanistan. And then after leaving the Air Force, you spent over 15 years in corporate America as a senior leader, where you helped a Fortune 100 company ascend to a Fortune 50 company. So I'm really excited to get to talk to you about your experience on separating from the military, your transition into corporate America, and getting into starting your own business. So every single time I do one of these interviews, I start with the same question, and that is, in 6 words or fewer, can you describe your transition from the military to civilian life?
So I think there's 2 2 negative words and 4 positive words. So the negatives are scary and overwhelming. But the good news is there were a lot more positives. Networking, learning / exploring. I know that's 2, but I'll smush them together, make them 1. Grateful and ultimately successful. So happy to dive into those with you, Jay. Thanks.
So you said scary, overwhelming, networking, learning, exploring, grateful, and successful. Well, I think that there's a lot of people who have the exact same feelings as they go through this. So let's start with scary. So you're getting out of the military. Let's go through that scary process for you. What was scary?
My original plan was I was gonna, serve my 20, at least, who knows, make it a career. And things were going along pretty well. And then in 2007, the Air Force made the decision to there was something called PBD 720, and it basically amounted to a massive reduction in force.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wasn't worried about getting riffed. I'd been picked up. I think I just pinned on major. Been picked up for command. I was actually at Education with Industry, and my name was on a school list. So I had all the right tickets punched. But we had just the president had just announced a surge right around that time, and what I saw happening was that the ops tempo was going to increase significantly at the same time that the force was going to get drawn down. And so, Jay, there were I talked to an acquaintance over at AFPC, and she showed me how to look up the numbers. And there were 9 majors. I was a public affairs officer. There were 9 majors in my year group. They were going to get rid of 6 of them, and it was similar levels of cut around all across the board. So the writing on the wall was very clear, and I knew that I would spend at least 50% of my remaining career deployed overseas. And I have a lot of respect for the folks who stayed in and had admiration and appreciation. And I'd certainly, I'd already done a tour of Afghanistan. I'd deployed before, but that didn't align with where, my wife and I, what we wanted to do at that time. So I made the decision. The Air Force, one of the things they were doing, they were offering people a lot of money to separate voluntarily. So I made the decision pretty quickly. But it was a scary decision, because I think from the time that I dropped papers to the time that I became a civilian, there were like 9 or 10 months. So it was, I've heard about people 7-day opting. It wasn't that fast, but it was, it was much faster, and it really was not. It hadn't been something I thought about before, so it was really terrifying. Um, I knew that was the right thing to do, but there was just a lot of fears that I think perhaps, and I'll also say this: if your listeners don't necessarily have these concerns, then maybe they should be thinking about them. But like, how am I going to get a job? Where am I going to? And this sort of scary and overwhelming blend together. But like, I don't know how to get a job. How do I do that? The Air Force told me what to do. The closest that I would come to getting a job was I'd like, try to work this assignment or that. But I had a job. How do I get a job? Where am I going to live? Air Force told, like, all these sort of basic things, down to, believe it or not, like, what am I going to wear? Like, legit, like, I was never much of good with fashion. And fortunately, I didn't have to make a lot of fashion choices in the Air Force. But all these sorts of things that were really, it was just a lot to process, and it was very scary. And thinking about that, and then at least my mind sort of went to worst case scenarios. Okay, what if I don't get a job? And unemployment at home, all these horrible thoughts, which maybe they weren't rational, but they're, at least for me, they're human, and I think other vets I've talked to, it's natural. And it can be scary, and that was the first thing.
So much just in that real reaction on how people feel when they get out, and different people get out at different stages in the career. Something that you mentioned that's so interesting is being aware of just what the situation is like where you're at. I think in ideal conditions, people are able to say, okay, I did 20 years or 30 years, however long, and they've got the whole planned out thing ahead of time. But it doesn't always work out like that.
Yep.
Having an idea for the market sometimes doesn't go according to plan. And then you also mentioned pretty early on about making that decision for your family. That's always on the minds of so many veterans on how they make that decision, not just for themselves, but for that responsibility that they have to their family members. So as you were talking about all of these very real, very scary things that a lot of veterans go through, how did you deal with those? How did you deal with those thoughts?
I'll answer that question two ways. The short answer is I sort of muddled through. And I did things like I was working out. I still work out, but it's like working out obsessively to help deal with that. But if I could go back in time, and 2024 Mike could talk to 2007 Mike, the thing I'd say is, dude, go talk to somebody. Like, go talk. Like, it's okay to get help. In 2007, there was a stigma in the military and in the veteran community against doing that. I think it's still there to a small extent, but not what it was. But that, I think the thing is realizing that these feelings are natural. They're, as you said, they're human, and it's okay. And just like, if you break your arm, you go see a doctor. If your feelings are a lot and they're there, go get help. It's okay.
Whenever I separated after I moved from the Baltimore DC area down to Texas, having a lot of those same similar feelings, and I did finally make the decision to go to mental health.
Good.
And I'll tell you that the VA was incredibly helpful and supportive of me. That there were resources, in addition to doing the one-on-one time with them, there were some group options. If people don't want to do group, that's fine. But also having that one-on-one time just to kind of help talk. And I found just by being able to start putting things into a line for me, because so much of what I felt was happening was things were just everywhere.
Yeah.
And it was scary just how much stuff there was. But then by talking with mental health, I was able to really focus on, what things were core to me, where to focus on, and then use that.
Kudos to you and everybody out there. And it is, when you need help, getting help, it is a sign of strength, not of weakness. It is a sign of strength. And anybody who says otherwise doesn't know what to believe they're talking
Yes,
about.
sir. Yes, sir. You put these two words next to each other because they are so well related: scary and overwhelming. So many things that can be overwhelming can lead into scary. But let's talk a bit specifically on why you chose this word, overwhelming.
I think if you pull it back, like you're being put in a situation where you are bombarded with information and bombarded with options, and you don't know what to do, where to turn, all these sorts of things. And there's so many things out there, and like some of it's really good stuff. Like, but it's like, whoa, like, I'm only one person. Like, what do I focus here? And you're sort of like doing one of these, and it can be really easy. And the other thing is, there really is there's a cottage industry of advice givers. There was a cottage industry when I was getting out in 2007. It's only grown. Some of it is really good stuff. A lot of it's garbage. And how do you sift through this? And by the way, I'll just say, thank you for doing this, because this falls into the good stuff category. But how do you sift through this? The thing I'll say, in sort of getting to the thing is that there's wrong answers, but there's not a right answer. Some of it is like just processing stuff that is overwhelming, like the VA process, getting, I also, I go to the VA for a number of things, but getting in the system, getting your disability, all that kind of stuff, that's a process. And, that can be an overwhelming I don't know if it's as bad now, but it was awful in 2007. From what I've heard from other vets, it's gotten a lot better. So good for that. But, doing that, dealing with all the military stuff, and then just like, it's such a big world out there. And, we're exposed to a lot of things as in the military, but my God, it's a huge world, and we're not exposed to that, and really knowing where to look, and do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? Like all these sorts of things. I'll give first, and this is a book. There's two books I recommend. I'll send these to you, and you can put them in the show. I don't get anything for this. One book I'll definitely recommend to folks is a book called "What Color Is My Parachute?" And I'll send you those details. And there's sort of two sides. One sort of tells you how to like get a job, but the other part sort of tells you how to figure out what you want to do when you grow up. And that's a big thing. Like that's part of the overwhelming thing. Like, I was a public affairs guy. Do I want to continue on being public affairs? Do I want to do something else? Do I want to stay in aerospace? Did I want to stay in aerospace and defense? Do I want to go into a different industry? There's all these other things, and it's all these different decision trees. And again, if folks have the luxury of doing this, like if you're at the 17-year point, that's I heard one of the other guests talking about, like if you're at the 17-year point, that's the time to do it. Or if you have like a 4-year enlistment, like after your first year, that like really start taking the time to work through this, so that you can work through those issues and work through those feelings of overwhelmingness that is out there.
That time element is such a big part of this too, is whenever you feel like there's not enough time, that can lead as a stressor to things feeling overwhelming, especially when that date is coming. End of service is X date, whether you're a 17-year guy or a 4-year guy, is eventually, that date's coming, and trying to work to that point, in addition to all the daily tasks that you have going on, whatever the mission of the day is to take care of. So it's a lot of work.
That fills into the part of overwhelming. And I mean, I think that's part of it, like where, and this is where I think just being a veteran gives you a little bit of an advantage, because we have the discipline, and we have the organizational tools, and set up a battle rhythm. If you're at the 3-year point, it's different, but set up a battle rhythm. Say, hey, I'm gonna, we'll talk about this, but I'm gonna have one networking conversation a week or one a month or whatever, just so I can start learning what's out there, and being a little less overwhelmed with all the different choices. Hey, I'm gonna go talk to. I'm 2 years out. You know what? I'm going to get my commander's permission. I'm going to go sit through a transition assistance class just to kind of learn. Like, so there's skills that we have as vets that you can bring to the table and apply to your transition.
So I think that networking is one of those interesting skill sets, because it can be done both actively and passively, but it just needs to be recognized when it's being done passively. Otherwise, it's not as useful. But let's start into networking. You chose this one as your third one, as a deliberate action, as a deliberate part of your transition. So networking for you, what was that experience like?
It was incredibly useful, and it was also it was also a skill that, frankly, I didn't understand or know. And I'll just lead with this, and again, hopefully we can put this in the show notes. This is a book I keep. This book didn't exist back then, but I use it for other stuff. It's called the 20-Minute Networking Meeting, and there's different versions. I think there's this one's an executive version for folks who've been in industry for a while. I think they have a veteran version too, as well. But yeah, go out on Amazon, read it. It's an easy read. But the thing is, first off, networking is a skill, and it absolutely can be learned. I don't believe, at least I certainly never learned this as a skill in the military. It was something you sort of have to pick up. And people, I think, first off, I'm thinking back then, there's even a connotation of networking as being something a little slimy, which is nonsense. It's not. What I think it is, it's having a purposeful conversation that can be for the benefit of both parties, with somebody you don't know. And look, the reality is, when you're having a networking conversation, you're really doing three things, right? It's you're looking for, in my mind, you're looking for three things, and I didn't make this up, but you're asking for advice, information, or a referral. The first thing is, hey, let's start with information too, right? Like, if you're doing this perfectly, let's say you're 3 years, 4 years out, like, the information you're seeking is like, just what's out there. What does the world look like outside when I take off the uniform? And you want to get those perspectives. And the best way is to have conversations. Hey, I think I want to be a financial advisor. Okay, cool. Well, you read an article about it. Well, go talk to a financial advisor. What do you do? What's a day in the life? Like, get those perspectives, and don't just get one. So that's one thing. The other thing, asking for advice. Hey, this is a little more targeted if you're sort of looking for something specific. But hey, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Hey, I want to be a financial advisor. I've been a infantry officer my entire career. What advice do you have for me? Okay, well, that's a good question, because they may, that may prompt a series of discussions, and they'll ask you, hey, you need A, B, C, D, whatever credentials you need, these kind of experiences. And then the third thing is a referral. Who else should I talk to? And maybe they'll give you a name, maybe they're not. Because this is the thing about a networking engagement, right? You're exposing yourself to other people, but they're making an evaluation of you. Do I like this person? Is this person a jerk? Am I comfortable introducing this person to somebody else I trust? Because if I am not, this person is going to embarrass me, and it's going to be a reflection on me. You'll notice the one thing I didn't say, it comes out of a networking conversation. You're not saying, "Can you give me a job?"
Mm-hmm.
You don't ask that. It's the sort of thing where, if you're doing the networking right, and again, I encourage folks to read this book or another book like it. It'll help you understand that you're going to learn something, and then you can make some decisions based on that. But it's really valuable, and you'll just learn all sorts of things. And that's I did a lot of networking, and I learned a lot about a lot of I still network. I was at a networking event last night for my business. Same thing. It's really just about building those relationships, and that's key. It's not a transactional thing. It's a relationship thing, and helping people understand. The other thing I'll say is in a networking meeting, the very last question you should always ask in a networking meeting is, how can I be of service to you? Always ask that question. First off, 99% of the networking, people who have networking conversations, 99% of the time, the people don't get asked that question. So it takes them aback in a good way. The second point is that sometimes you'll get some really interesting and wonderful requests. I had the best thing. I had a networking conversation not too long ago with somebody, and we were talking about business, all that kind of stuff. And then I said, well, I asked him that question. He said, my daughter's a senior in college, and I do strategic communication. And he's like, my daughter's a senior in college. Can you just talk to her? She wants to be a PR person when she grows up. I'm like, absolutely. And Jay, I spoke to her, and it was one of the sweetest and most, like, the questions she asked were just like, they were just wonderful questions. And I like just so just it was one of the nicest conversations I really had in a long time. Like this young woman's enthusiasm and her energy and her passion, and just the questions were so, I was like, yeah, this is why I do what I do. It was wonderful. So you really get a lot from this stuff.
You're the first person I've heard talk about networking, not just as a skill, but really with like specific things and steps to do within networking. And I think a lot of people, when you mentioned there's kind of that stigma where people think it's just asking for you. It's a whole different approach. It's a relationship thing. Those pieces of how to do networking, asking for information, advice, and referrals, but then also following it up with how can you be of service to someone. I think that's something that a lot of people, as they go into networking, is a good structure for how they can approach it while they're still in the military, when they get out of the military, just a constant thing to keep working.
I think networking is really, it's a skill, and you can use it while you're wearing a uniform and out, and it's just a really good, it's a skill that will pay huge dividends, maybe not financial, but just emotional and from a relationship standpoint. And we could devote hours, I'm sure there are, just to the value of networking. But yeah, it's great. I'm a huge fan of it.
And a lot of what, as you're networking, I know that you're also building those opportunities to then learn something new, which ties to your next point, learning and exploring. So why did you pick these words, and how was that part of your journey?
You don't really have a huge sense of what the world is like outside the military. It's you're sort of living um, a very, for the most part, a very all-encompassing environment. I might have had a very small leg up in that I was doing education with industry at the time when I made the decision. So I was actually active duty Air Force, but I was wearing civilian clothes and I was learning. The idea at the time was learn civilian best practices and then bring them back to the Air Force. But then, PVD 720 came along and made the decision. So I had a little bit of a taste, but it is a different world and it is a big world. And so really you're learning, and I was learning and exploring, and I wasn't just learning about what's out there. I was really learning about what I wanted to do when I grew up. And it was funny, like it took a long time to sort of get there. Because I was really exploring all these different industries. And, ultimately I wound up pretty much, as close, I wound up in defense working for Raytheon, which is, it's about, I don't know if it's half a step removed, but it's pretty darn close because, I was and continue working in super close proximity to the men and women wearing the uniform. But my initial thought was I really wanted to do something very different from the military, and so I sort of explored, and I was talking to different companies and learning about like different industries, and I looked at high tech and all these other sort of industries, and I sort of found that where my niche was and where I felt most comfortable was just because of my DNA was in the aerospace and defense industry at the time, which but that's sort of an exploration thing. The other thing is the learning piece is I learned learn about industry. Frankly, I learned a lot about myself. I also learned about people, good and bad. And what I mean is that we have an assumption, I think, in the military that because of the people we're dealing with, and we have these core values, that we're dealing with other people who have like there's a baseline of trust between us. If I go ask another person wearing a uniform something, I have that reasonable expectation they're going to tell me the truth to the best of their knowledge. People are people. It doesn't always happen, but 99.99% of the time. So this was my first encounter really with folks who are like, no, they're people who are out there for themselves. So I remember, I won't say his name, and unfortunately he was a veteran, which is sort of why I had the trust. I asked him about, I thought, okay, I really want to do public relations, communications. And he's like, no, you don't want to do that. That's not a real, hand to God, he said this. He said, there's not a real career field there, that nobody does this in the civilian world. Well, the guy had an agenda, right? He wanted me, and he was a slime bag. He wanted me to come work for him at his startup in San Francisco, and probably pay me a pittance too, and doing like a specific PM sort of thing. So he was giving me like this false information. I mean, he was just flat out lying to me. And that was a good learning experience as well. And, that's why, again, networking, right? Because I'd had enough conversations where when he told me this, I'm like, that doesn't sound right. And then I spoke to some other folks after, I'm like, now this guy's a flat out liar. But so sort of learning about people, exploring and all that sort of stuff. But it was a really good learning and a wonderful exploration process.
That's such a fascinating thing, is because of the work of networking of other people, you already were able to identify when something wasn't necessarily as it seemed, as it was being described, because you had other people that you could then go back and fact check on. And that, everything that you've given so well interweaves with each other. So the learning and the networking part as well was able to give you that chance to then go and see really if it was, true or not, and then make an informed decision off of that. And I think that's something that veterans can kind of note too, is as they go through this experience of transition, knowing that they're going to encounter experiences that they may not be the subject matter experts on, they may not know anything on, but to go back and ask questions about it. I mean, whether it's your family or friends, but certainly looking into these peer groups that you network with can help you along that learning and exploring process.
And Jay, I think that's a good one. And if you'd asked me for a seventh word, it would have been humility, right? Because you really do have to approach this. You have to approach this with humility. Like you just again, it's just knowing and being comfortable with that. Like you're not the expert. Wonderful. You might have been like a flag officer, or you might have been the best at whatever in your battalion, whatever. It doesn't matter. You're not the expert, and that's okay. And that's one of the beauties, and that's why you're going there and you're learning and you're doing all these things and taking it in and really learning about all this sort of stuff out there and learning about other things that you don't have exposure to.
I think that ties into our next point on being grateful.
Yeah.
So what were the things that you were most grateful about during your transition?
When you're networking with people, like especially like as a veteran, people like you'll encounter, like there's going to be plenty, you send out emails or however you're reaching out to folks. A lot of folks just aren't going to respond. That's fine. That's there's life gets busy. But the folks I had conversations with were so kind and so generous with their time. And really, I mean, if I had to list the names of people, we'd have like a huge, it'd just be like a list of names that don't mean anything to the people there, but just people that really gave me good advice, gave me information, gave me good referrals, and really helped me think this through and transition and ultimately get a role that was a really good fit for me, and gave me an opportunity to do some good things. It really it takes a village, and there's just a sense of gratitude toward it. And the thing that people said to me and that it stuck with me, and I'll say this, is that you certainly can ask people what to do. The one thing I heard from others consistently, and I take to heart, is pay it forward. And that's why, like, I don't, I try to help other veterans or whatever I'm doing this, but I definitely believe in karma, right? And I'll just tell you a story. So there was a few years ago, there was this college senior who reached out to me on LinkedIn. She was at my alma mater. She found me, and she wanted to have a conversation about, going into the Air Force and the defense industry. So I talked with her, and I kind of forgot about it. This was like 10 or 12 years ago. And then about a year ago, I needed to reach somebody in a specific company. And so I go to LinkedIn and I'm like, okay, who do I know in this company? And it's this woman, and I'm like, how do I know you? And I went to the LinkedIn messaging, and I'm like, okay, wait, I spoke to you like 12 years ago. So I messaged her on LinkedIn. Okay, check this out. She was on maternity leave. Okay. Like, she had just had her first kid on maternity leave, and she got back to me within like a day, and we did a call like while our kid was napping. Like, that's like, you know, I didn't have any expectation, and she certainly didn't need to do any of that. But like, it's just you just want to pay it forward. But there's just a sense of gratitude. There's a lot of really good people out there, some not so good, but I think the good people, and especially, there's a lot of people who want to help vets out there that will make an effort, and so there's a sense of gratitude, that I have a profound sense of gratitude.
Oh, it's such an important part too, just as you go through these different steps, knowing that things aren't necessarily owed to us as veterans. So being grateful for that. There's so much great experience that we get that's applicable into the civilian world as we transition from our military careers into the civilian ones. But being grateful for those opportunities, the people we meet, the things we're able to learn along the way. Those pay dividends, maybe not immediately that moment, but they can pay dividends so long down the line, because people will remember how you treated them more than anything. If I worked with someone and I remember that guy was just a total piece of work, and I get a question from that person 10 years down the line, I'll be less inclined to want to be helpful, even if I have that. And so people will have that same opinion of us as we go.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's well said. Well said.
Well, now we get to the last word of the 6 you've done, and we mentioned at the very beginning, you've successfully started up Fortis, taking Raytheon, which was already such a big company, as a senior leader, and then helping it ascend even higher, successful as your transition. So you really have two major transitions here. Your first one into the corporate world, and then a second one into entrepreneurship. So tell me how you were successful in getting into these parts.
So ultimately, what happened through networking, I encountered a gentleman who unfortunately passed away not too long ago. He's a retired colonel by the name of Dave Shea, who was sort of a legend in the public affairs community. And then he got me, I'd reached out to, I joined the Air Force Public Affairs Association. I reached out to I think I sent and legit, I sent letters. And that was by design, right? Because letters are very rare. People don't get letters in the mail. So I sent legit letters to these people. And then I followed up with a phone call, like a week or two later. And I spoke with a gentleman by the name of Dave Shea, who put me in touch with a hiring manager at Raytheon. And that's sort of where I wound up having a career. One thing I'll just maybe a sidebar is, when you're interviewing with a company, it's as much you interviewing them as they interviewed you. And you have to keep that in mind. Because the way that a company, the way they treat you during an interview, that's going to reflect how your experience there is. So trust your gut. If your spidey sense is tingling, believe it. And then, we can talk about that. I've got some boy, did I dodge a bullet type of stories. But, I wound up going to work for Raytheon, and it was a wonderful run there. I did a number of different things. I stayed with the company, transferred, took a bunch of different roles, wound up becoming an executive there. And then so, that part was successful, and I felt very fortunate in that regard. And then in 23, they, and it was shades of PVD 720 again, right? They, the company had, in 2020, had merged with United Technologies. And then in 2023, there was sort of a consolidation, and they offered executives very generous severance packages. And I was sort of at a point, and my boss took the severance package. The other executives on my peers on the same leadership team, we all took it. And I made the decision. And again, it was a this decision I made in a weekend with my wife. We were just kind of weighing the pros and cons to take the severance package. I did not, so my initial plan was to, become a quote unquote consultant and then go work for another large defense prime or something like that, which is sort of the natural path. But then two things sort of happened. I started, and again, going back to great networking, learning, and exploring, grateful. I mean, all those same things are exactly the same. Maybe a little less scary over a little less, but certainly all of those. But I wound up actually starting doing work for different clients, and I'm like, oh, this is really cool, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm able to make a really good contribution helping these clients in the aerospace and defense sector, some of the commercial aerospace and the high tech sort of stuff. Really enjoying that. Still continue to interview, but I was offered a role at at one of the primes. I'm not going to say who, and it was a good role, and I'm like, I think I'm good for now. I also continue to interview, but the consulting has given me the luxury of like, no, if it's not the right fit, and there have been just some downright scary, scary companies, and like, whoa, you guys are awful. Mm-hmm. But so I really, my decision was to really focus in on the consultancy and really grow that business. And I feel very blessed, very grateful that I've got wonderful clients through networking. Yeah, I've got a website because it's 2024. You have to. But the only people, the only inbound emails I get from the website are, my friends trolling me and people trying to sell me stuff. But it's networking and all these other things. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and I feel very blessed and grateful that I'm able to help companies this way.
So, as we're talking about being successful, so many of these things that you talk about really came from that experience that you had, where you were able to then go through and look back at your network and have that advice and information and the things that you've learned. But you also mentioned about that gut feeling and how important that is. And I think that's an area to really stress, because I find that a lot of people will go through this transition process, and there'll be different opportunities for them. And there's information that they have to consider, again, using those networks and their learning experiences over time, but to trust in that gut and what it means for them. Because I personally have had those experiences where there was a job that perhaps seemed really good, but I got that same gut feeling, and ultimately what I determined it was the culture wasn't the right fit for me. Where whether it was myself into them or them for me, is that for me, I felt that it would be a culture mismatch to where we just wouldn't be able to work through things, even if everything else, the experience, everything else seemed right on paper. If it seemed like that culture part wasn't going to fit, I didn't want anything to do with it. That's what my gut would tell me. So I definitely encourage people to trust that as part of their process in order to be successful.
110%. You can definitely improve and hone your gut, but you're basically you're picking up on these cues, and you probably can't pick up on things looking at a website or looking at a job description. I think you can pick them up. Certainly, you can pick them up over the phone or over Zoom, or 100% you can pick them up in person. I mean, I'll just share one story. So I was interviewing with this one company, right? And they're like, hey, the team's in town. Why don't you come down and meet with the team? I'm like, cool. So I come down and they're like, we're having dinner at a Chili's. Why don't you have dinner with us? I'm like, sure, why not? Whatever, whatever. I'm not a snob. So I get down there and it was like the weirdest thing. And so then I get there, they don't ask me if I wanted anything to eat or drink. So then I'm like, okay. And I thought they literally invited me to, they didn't ask me for that. And then, so I flagged the waitress. I order a Diet Coke. I'm talking with them, blah, 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 blah. And then like, okay, well, hey, we really appreciate you coming out. Thanks for your time. They didn't even offer me an appetizer. And then they didn't even, I picked up the tab for the Diet Coke, $1.29. I mean, like, it's just like, wow, you guys can't even spring for a $20 dinner for me at Chili's or pay $1.29 for my Diet Coke, or have a base and decency to offer me a drink of water or ask me, and you guys are going to be my coworkers? Hard pass. Funny story. Fast forward a few years later, I'm talking to this same company. They've been acquired and something like that. And we got to the stage of salary. Like, I'm like, this company been acquired. And they were off by, I'll say about $90,000 to $100,000 low, like what the industry standard was. Like, and all the same red flags where they're different people, but trust your gut. Trust your gut.
That industry standard question. So salary, that's a question that I think a lot of people don't know how to approach. Is what is the reasonable expectation for salary when I get out? And that can be difficult because that range, I have seen jobs that have what you're talking about, almost $100,000 range in their salary, which is huge. And how you're trying to pinpoint exactly what the company actually wants to offer. Just a spoiler alert for people, it's usually on the low end. But in order to be as successful as possible in your own salary negotiations, you got to know what the market standard is. You got to know people who are in the business doing similar things, and it can be a difficult question to ask them. If I were just to go up to someone and say, hey, how much do you make? That's an awkward question. It's off-putting. It puts people on their heels. But if you're approaching it from I'm trying to learn more about the career field and what it looks like. That's a better way to approach that, to ask those questions so you can have an idea what the industry standard salary is as you're going in, so you can ensure that, one, you're not getting lowballed or that you're getting paid appropriately on it. But two, it can give you an idea of what the company understands and where they put their value on whatever job you're doing. Because I found when companies massively are undervaluing what they're paying for something, that's indicative of how you could expect to be treated at that company as well.
So well said. And I think the other thing too, and just when you're having the networking conversations, don't say, hey, hey, dude, how much do you make? Say, hey, if you sort of have a role dialed in and but just ask what's the salary range, and they'll share with that. And can you give me a salary, what the industry standard is? And again, you sort of triangulate through that. That's probably the best way to do that. Obviously there's websites and all that, but as Abraham Lincoln once said, you can't believe everything you read on the internet. So, it's really just having those conversations with people to get an understanding. And then part of that too is understanding what goes into a compensation package. Like, if you're looking at like a startup or something like that, salaries tend to be lower. They're going to offer you equity, and that that may be worth a lot of money someday, or it may be worth nothing, and that's okay. And that goes in different things like your risk tolerance, benefits. So there's really a lot of different elements that go in, and having those conversations. Unlimited PTO, good thing or bad thing? Well, depends who you ask, because again, unlimited PTO is nice, but companies are doing that for a reason, and that reason is that if you leave or you get let go, they don't owe you anything. There's a lot of studies out there that find that people who have unlimited PTO actually take less. So good and bad, and it's not right, but sort of that's where the networking and having those conversations with people, learning, exploring, all those sorts of things will go into helping make a transition that is right for you.
Well, Mike, we've covered so many different things. Just about first, thank you so much for sharing. The 6 very personal things about your transition going from the military to civilian life. Things that other veterans can all relate with. Wanted to thank you one more time for your time on being here on Veteran CEO today.
Thanks so much, Jane. Thanks for doing this. I think it's a great service that you're doing for veterans. So I'm honored that you reached out to me, and I'm able to make a small contribution. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This is Veteran CEO, where veterans lead the way.